Now, one of the things we're talking about in this hierarchy, there's terms like non-negotiable. Now, going back a few years ago, even our Holy Father, Pope Benedict Emeritus, talked about the idea of, in his mind, life, marriage, family, and authentic human freedom were like his non-negotiables. Others have talked about the idea, I know our theology team has talked about things like the dignity of human life from conception and natural death, the dignity of marriage and family, and the protection of the right of parents to educate their children being a couple of the ones that are non-negotiables. How do you see that?
Right. Well, I think those are all warranted, and they not only come out of our tradition, right, but they also come out of the teachings of Jesus, and they also come out of our reflection, what we call our philosophical reflection and our moral reflection on the teachings of Jesus. So there's a very good reason for those non-negotiables. For example, with Jesus, clearly, the intrinsic goodness of every single human being, right? The intrinsic dignity of every single human being, the least of human beings, right? Whatsoever you do to these least brothers and sisters of mine, you do unto me. I mean, there is no greater statement of the intrinsic and universal dignity, right, of human beings, every human being. And once you see that, we have to defend it. I mean, Jesus is basically giving this to us. I mean, he's also telling us, about adultery. For Jesus, he basically says, look, adultery is the a breakup of the marriage, which of course is the foundation of our interpersonal personhood, if I can put it that way. We don't come into the world by ourselves. We come into the world in our family. The family relationship that we have is not just in our physical genes. The family relationship we have is built into us in our environment, in this marriage, and it's the sacred covenant of marriage that guarantees that this kind of interpersonal being, this kind of stability of identity for the children, the stability of the covenant, that's going to be the building block of culture, is going to be vouchsafed. And so we have to remember this, right, as how important marriage is, and the definition of marriage is, especially with respect to the interpersonal identity of every human being and the stability of the family for the children who will be raised by it. So these things are not only built into Jesus' teaching, but we've reflected on this over 2,000 years, and we've come up with a very refined moral theology, which justifies what Pope Benedict was saying, namely, right, that these things are non-negotiables in and of themselves. I mean, you can almost, from St. Thomas Aquinas has a wonderful way of looking at what's called ontological superiority, and that's just a fancy way of saying, you kind of can rank certain evils by the destructiveness that they are going to, that's going to happen, or the quality of destructiveness, degree of destructiveness that will happen if you violate it. So, for example, you can just say, well, the killing of a human life versus the maiming of somebody. Well, what is a worse evil? Yes, killing the whole person is worse than killing part of a person, or maiming part of a person, or injuring part of a person. So you can, again, one has an ontological superiority, I just say a superiority of being over the other, so the destruction of it is more evil than the destruction, than simply the injuring of somebody. Or you can also say, and this comes into our political philosophy, and the way Catholics have absolutely influenced political philosophy. That is to say, the destruction of life is going to be a more important, a worse evil, right, than the destruction of liberty. Why? Because liberty is just a condition of life. Of course it's an ideal condition of life. Of course it's one of the most important conditions of life to be fully human. But if you destroy the life, right, that automatically means that liberty is impossible,
right,
by definition. So obviously it's worse to destroy the life than to destroy a condition of life. It's worse, to destroy conditions of life that have much greater effect on whether a person can be human or not, right, than one that has a lesser effect on whether one can be human or not. So, right, if I say, well, what's more important, liberty or property, the right to liberty or the right to private property? It's the right to liberty. And the reason is, of course, that liberty affects my whole capacity to be a fully human being, right? If somebody is enslaving me, I have absolutely no humanity left, practically, except what's in the domain of my thoughts and my prayers. Everything else has been taken away. Whereas if somebody says, I'm going to take away your property, but at least you still have some, liberty within your own domicile or within your own family and so forth and so on, that's a very different thing, right? It's a less degree of harm, right? Less evil. And of course, we do this all the time. Our whole political philosophy is filled with it. In fact, Francisco Suarez, who was the Jesuit who basically discovered inalienable rights, when he discovers the inalienable rights in his major tractate De Legibus on the laws, he shows that there is a natural hierarchy of rights. I mean, and now he doesn't come out and talk about it that way, but he speaks about the rights in a hierarchical way. And in other words, a life right is more important than what would be called, custody over one's, inner, one's self, and a liberty right that we call today. He didn't call it a liberty right, and that's more important than a property right, and so forth. So the key thing, though, is you can always use what's called the necessity criterion. If one if one right is necessary for the very existence of the other right, in other words, the very possibility of the other right, then the first right has to be considered more significant, more fundamental in any rights conflict. So, for example, if the right to life is necessary for the very possibility for the right to liberty, which it is, obviously, if you're dead, your liberty rights are a moot point, right? Then, of course, the life right has to be more significant than the liberty right. And so if it comes to a contest, for example, in Roe versus Wade, right, where we see that it's the privacy right of the mother versus the life right of the preborn child, notice that Roe versus Wade went in favor of the liberty right, which goes completely against any logic of the intrinsic ordering of rights by necessity or the intrinsic ordering of rights by ontological superiority. I mean, it just literally wiped out the objective bases for the hierarchy of rights and the resolution to rights conflict just by the sweep of their hand and a little signature on the pen, and they literally take jurisprudence and ground it into the dirt. So, I mean, it's an amazingly cavalier way, too, in which it's done, pretending as they did that they had consulted with so many people in trying to come to this, this absolutely sophomoric conclusion, which should be within the purview of the justices who have been through both undergraduate and, of course, legal education. Unbelievable.